Good evening. Welcome to the RSU 5 Board of Directors meeting. It is Wednesday, October 23rd, 2019, and we are at the Pownell Elementary School. Everyone is here. I think Rhea is coming. Hopefully she'll be joining us shortly. But the rest of the board is here, so we'll get started with the Pledge of Allegiance. Thank you. So I would take a motion for consideration and approval of the minutes of the October 9th, 2019 meeting as presented, barring any errors or omissions. Yes.
I actually have an error.
Okay.
My name is spelled wrong.
We'll fix that. Subject to that adjustment, are you willing to make the motion?
I will make the motion.
Thank you. And a second? Valley, thank you. All those in favor? None opposed. Great, thank you. Adjustments to the agenda?
None.
None. Good news and recognition. Maybe we'll start with Lisa, and then if Rhea gets here, we'll jump back to the student report.
Students handled our evacuation. It went off without a hitch. Stephanie Moria and Aaron Dow took care of us at lunchtime. The high school was welcoming. The fire department was a wonderful partner in that, and it ended up being something that we didn't have to worry about, but it was great to have such good practice. Officer McManus was with us at the high school and felt like the whole reunification process went really well for families, so it ended up to be a great opportunity to really practice and see how our drills have paid off for kids. So that was the first thing I thought. You may know that Pownell ended up hosting both the middle school and high school football team this fall, and after a few bumps that Craig kind of helped us with, that's worked out really well. It's been really nice to see Pownell alumni come back in. The kids have used our STEM lab to do some of their film, and I think it's been a wonderful way for us to give back to the RSU, to have that opportunity while the Pownell Road field has been seeded. So that's gone really well this fall. And the last thing I wanted to talk about was last spring, Abigail Levitt, our school nurse, has sort of taken up the gardening charge here at Pownell, and she had the kindergartners plant a pumpkin patch last spring, and they were able to harvest those this fall. Each class carved a pumpkin, and the first graders were able to bring it over to the Camp Sunshine display in Freeport. So it was just nice for them to see that whole process go full circle. So things are going well, and it's been a great fall, so thanks.
Thank you, Lisa. I heard there was a parent who came to pick up their kid at the high school because they were worried about how they would feel about it, and the kid was like, I'm good, I'm staying. So that's good to hear. They enjoyed the high school already. All right, so we will jump to number 7 on our agenda for public comments. Just looking at you, Tim. Nothing? I prompted him.
Hello, I'm Tim Giddon from Pownell. Now just a resident, no official capacity anymore. And I know you're going to talk about the cost-sharing formula tonight. It's one of my favorite subjects. Being part of the RPC committee, I can tell you I don't blame you for not understanding it. It's a very complicated formula that some financial minds of the 3 communities get together and put together, and I think they're all trying to outdo each other. So it came out so nobody could really understand it. But I also know that there was some question on I think it was the aid that Freeport is paying above, or all of that aid goes goes into, or none of it goes to Freeport, special ed aid, okay? So I remember that part of it, and that was kind of a compromise because the other two towns were bringing in state aid where Freeport is a minimal receiver. So that was kind of a compromise on Freeport's part to kind of contribute to the pot. So that's where that came from. So I also noticed on the video there was a comment about TIFs, and Pownell has no TIFs. I know Freeport has some TIFs, so the comment was made that Pownell has a TIF, but we don't yet. Maybe someday, I don't know. So in the agreement, it was stated, we'll go with this because we can't come up with anything better that everybody will agree to. So part of the reason why Freeport especially didn't want to go with what was recommended by the state, which was all value, the town's values, is because Freeport's value was so much higher than the other towns. So, and the fact that Pownell at the time was valued at 43%, I think it was, of what the state said we should be at. So now we've corrected that. Pownell is now at 100%, and I believe the other two towns are right around there too. So I think that's kind of a moot point now. So I think value is something that you should consider. I know a year ago or so you were considering some formula based on value and student count or something like that. So I would recommend you go that way, value and maybe a 70-30 split on student count or something like that. So that's my 2 cents worth or more.
Thank you, Tim. Okay, so we will move on to the superintendent's report.
Okay, Craig, I think sent all of you a sports update as he did me, and I just want to do a shout out to the Freeport golf team. They finished second at the Class B state championship. Field hockey is hosting the regional quarterfinal right now, I think. I don't know how they're doing. We're playing Leavitt, which is in Turner, my old stomping ground, so I'm kind of curious about the game. The girls soccer finished their season at 10-3-1, and it looks like we'll be hosting Lincoln in the quarterfinals on Tuesday, October the 29th. The boys soccer finished their season 8-3-3, and it looks like we'll be hosting Cape on Wednesday, and we don't know the time yet. Football is currently with the record of 5-1. And the last regular season will be played this Saturday at Camden Hill, starting at 1:30. Our cross-country team did fairly well in the WMC championship. The girls finished second, and there's Rhea coming in. The boys finished fourth, and will be in the regional championship this Saturday at October the 29th in Cumberland, and then we'll also be participating in the state championship November the 2nd in Cumberland. And I also want to mention the play Xanadu is coming up. We'll be roller skating all over the stage, and so I just can't wait to see that. Cynthia and I today attended the MSSA conference, and we'll be joined by Lindsay F., and Michelle, Maddie, Mar, and Beth tomorrow. So I'm really excited about the board turnout.
Great turnout.
I think that's the best since I've been here. So thank you all for signing up. We have lots of wonderful sessions to choose from. The keynote speaker will be Dr. Donna Beagle, and she's the president of Communication Across Barriers and author of See Poverty, Be the Difference. And she'll be providing her insights for communicating and working more effectively around race, poverty, gender, and generational barriers. So I think we'll have a lot of great new learning in hearing her insights around that. Today we heard from Joe Sanfilippo about, just getting the positive stories out about our schools, and I think in RSU 5 we just have lots of great stories to tell. And he talked more about being very intentional in our messaging. Believe it or not, we've started discussing budget. So in my meetings with administrators, I think I met with Lisa this week, and we started talking about some needs here at Pownell. At our next A-team meeting at the beginning of November, we'll start our whole group kind of brainstorming. And then our new Director of Finance will be beginning on November the 18th, and we'll have to jump right into that budget development. I also attended the Greater Sebago Educational Alliance. As you know, we just joined that this past year, this past Monday, and I have good news. Our understanding currently is that we will be even receiving more money in this next year due to our participation in that regional center. Last year, we received about $94 per student, and what we're hearing right now is it's going to be closer to $200 per student this coming year. Our focus continues to be on collaborating on professional development opportunities as well as the food purchasing. We just had an opportunity on October the 11th. Cynthia and I have reviewed that feedback. It's been really positive, and so we're hoping, the region is hoping to offer a similar type of format in March for our staff. We also have received the MEA scores from the past year, and we're starting to analyze them, and we'll look forward to discussing that with you. I think we set our data discussion for December, so that'll be coming up before we know it. And I think that concludes my superintendent report. Just in time to hand it over to Raya.
Are you settled? I would say we could jump to anything else, but then the next ones might be long. So we'll give you a second.
So, field hockey is up 2-0.
Oh,
very nice.
that's great. Thank you, Jeremy. Yes.
All right, so good news. The class of 2020, my class, the seniors, we're doing our traditional citrus sale this fall. So order forms will be distributed throughout advisories, and extra copies can be picked up in Ms. Bessie's room. And you can also order online. And our theater department is doing Xanadu, as Dr. Foley mentioned. And this Saturday, we're having a roller skating party at Happy Wheels in Portland. And come one, come all. It'll be a great time. I'm going, and it's $5 entry. No, it's 5 o'clock. Oh, it's 5 o'clock? Oh, yeah. It's like 6 something. It's $6.50 is the cost of entry, and it is at, I don't know what time it's at. I'm not clear on the time.
It's 5 to 7.
It's 5 to 7. Thank you. And we're excited to announce that my friend Jeremy Broken was accepted into the Jazz All-State Ensemble for jazz guitar. He is an incredible jazz guitarist. If you've heard him play, he's very talented. And yeah, so he was accepted. It's a really big deal, so we're excited. He'll be going in January to the Jazz All-State Festival. And then as for games, I'm not sure if Dr. Foley, I missed it, I'm sorry, I had a college interview. Boys varsity
Perfectly
football.
Reasonable reason to not be here.
Thank you very much. I think it went well. Boys varsity football beat Poland regional nights last Friday. Girls varsity field hockey beat Yarmouth on the 16th. And boys varsity soccer beat Freiburg on the 15th. And that's all for tonight. Thank you.
I hope you dropped at the end of your interview, like, I have to go. I'm the student representative on the school board.
I definitely
Very
did.
prestigious. Well, good luck on the interview. Okay, so hopefully Lisa's rested and ready to jump back up there with her Pownell School Goal Review.
I'm going to start by talking a little bit about last year, and I think that will sort of tell the story as far as where this year's goals came from. So, as I mentioned with my good news, we're kind of calling this Pownell 2.0 because in the last 3 years, almost like every one of our classroom teachers is new. So one of the challenges that we always face here is being just a singleton in the grade levels. So we set a goal last year around reading proficiency, and we saw better results from our intermediate teachers than we did in our primary classrooms. And part of that we attribute to just being brand new. And really supporting them all along the way. Also having our literacy strategists go out mid-year with quite a serious car accident. So, we're going to keep going with that. As Dr. Foley mentioned, the preliminary MEA results are back, and I'm happy to say that at grades 4 and 5, we saw a 20% increase in the students meeting their ELA growth targets across the board. Last year, we also started an initiative, thanks to Dr. Violet, with using Orton Gillingham for those students who really needed a more structured approach to literacy. And we are happy to say that for those really struggling students, we were able to see 50% of them hit their growth targets, which is a great start in the first year. We also work to continue our visible learning work with really looking at how students are developing agency around their goals and around how teachers are using visible displays in their room to help kids to sort of identify progress over time. 100% of the staff felt like that was work that we were doing that would impact their classroom the very next day. So they really enjoyed that collegiality around talking to each other about how they're making that learning visible. Students are growing in their ability to say, even from a young age, what goals they're working on in reading, writing, and math, and how they achieve those. So that's work that will continue, and we're working to help kids to sort of see all the connections to their learning, to their life, and to the progress that they're making. We're really working on our mentorship so that our older students see how they can be leaders at a young age and can support students over time, so that work will continue. We looked at our satisfaction survey in our leadership meeting, and one of our goals was really around that staff collegiality, and 100% of the staff rated PES as either quite positive or extremely positive, so we're happy with that. You can see the top 3 factors were colleagues, culture, and leadership, which pretty much covers it, right? So that's great. So we met to look at how does the work that we did last year inform where we're going this year? And we feel for our primary teachers, it's a big lift to come in and be teaching the curriculum that they're teaching in reading, writing, and math. And so we wanted to keep our primary teachers focused on the reading work to continue to see that progress. You'll also see that a big factor that we felt like needed to be worked on was the ability to really have strong classroom management. And in other places, notably around the district, they've seen the responsive classroom work really have a positive impact. So we hosted a 4-day responsive classroom training that our teachers and many of the Durham community teachers were able to participate in. And the 4-day training, having participated in the 1-day training, there's just there's no comparison in what you get in the depth of the 4-day training. So we're hoping that 100% of our staff will be able to continue to be trained in responsive classroom. We have a consultant coming in January to see how we're doing with those practices, and we're really focused on using the reinforcing and redirecting language and building self-discipline, because the other part of what we saw last year was when you have a few kids that are sort of off the rails, that can really impact instruction. So thank you for the RTIB Halftime Ed Tech, because we really feel like the responsive classroom is going to really help us with the Tier 1 classroom management, and the RTIB will help for those students who need more skills around self-regulation and support. So I'm the name in the sort of the education speak world out there right now is the multi-tiered system of support, and it's really what you've all charged us with and what we've been working on around every child deserves to make a year's worth of growth in a year's time, but we're launching a 3-year initiative so that we can really build systems. I feel like we learned a lot about how you bring in new people to the organization in this building last year, and so we're really working on how do we make sure that that work happens right as somebody walks through the door. And that multi-tiered system of support is really looking at, so how's it going in the classroom? What's the tier 1 support? How are you helping all kids to use a universal screener so you know where everyone is, so that if you already have skills, you're working on new goals, or if you are striving in a particular area, that you get a focused intervention. And we're bringing in the behavioral support with that this year with the RTIB, so students are able to work on that self-regulation and those executive function skills so that they're able to access their academics. So we're going to be looking at that cross-section of, are those behavioral supports not only reducing behaviors, but also giving kids more access to their academics. So that's where that goal is going. We heard from teachers, again through the satisfaction survey, around really helping elementary teachers to narrow their focus and to have more time with our new staff meeting structure to really collaborate. And so Durham and Pownell have launched a whole series of cross-building collaborations so that our teachers have more teammates, and Durham teachers have another fresh view on their teams as well. So we've planned out a whole series of time where teachers are really directing that work around responsive planning, so that they're able to dig into what they're seeing kids do and respond right away. So that came right from the satisfaction survey, and teachers are already reporting in both buildings that they've been incredibly productive meetings, and they appreciate the time to work together. In doing that work, the administrators took on sort of looking at teacher workload, and we sort of divided up pre-K 3 to focus on literacy and 4 and 5 to focus on math. So you'll see our academic goals match that. So, when I looked at the data for 4th and 5th grade, I'm feeling like our literacy practices are stronger than necessarily some of our math practices are, although we had a lot of kids move to the exceeds category in math on the MEA, so I'm excited for you to see that data coming out too. But we're really working on responding to the information teachers are giving us and helping them to go deeper in the work and really see the results of what they're doing. So that's kind of a rambly way to tell you what we're doing. Any questions?
Thank you, Lisa. Molly.
Thank you, that was great. Lisa, a couple of quick questions.
Sure.
The time that you referred to, during which teachers from Pownell and Durham and Maslaning, maybe?
So some of the time when we have a full PLD day, then it's like all of the 5th grade teachers from the whole grade level are together, or the October 11th day, we had the everyday math consultant, Talia Edlin, our new math strategist, and all the 4th and 5th grade teachers together. There are other times, just because of travel, that Mass Landing with Critical Mass is doing something in their building, and Pownell and Durham are doing something together, as far as the cross-building work.
And that sometimes happens after school.
Yes, it's part of our, the 36 hours of staff meeting time.
Right.
We worked on a tentative schedule. We brought it to our leadership teams, had them look at it, planned those extra half hours. So there are some meetings that are an hour and a half, just to make those more fruitful for folks. And those are planned out, and teachers have those already, so they know the schedule for the whole year, and had input into building that.
Yeah. And I just wanted to comment on how wonderful it is that so quickly after receiving the results of the satisfaction survey, you're acting on it.
Oh,
Because most of what you said was directly responding to what teachers were saying they wanted more of, so that's great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, I
I'm
think
sure they're
feedback is
grateful.
something that, I agree with what Dr. Foley said. So you'll see one of the action items was the Leadership Institute at Teachers College. Emily Graham, Julie Nickerson, and I just got back. And we came back thinking, this district's got it going on, and like we have to be marketing that because we went into what they identify as one of their highest functioning New York City schools. And it's like, we're doing that, we're doing that, we're doing that. And so, I think the scholarship in this district is something that we can all really be proud of. And the use of feedback. There were a number of leadership sessions on helping administrators to use feedback. And I feel like our teachers are using feedback. They're asking for feedback. We're trying to respond to the feedback they give. So it was great to have that information. Yeah.
Any other questions for Lisa? Great, thank you. Okay, so our next administrator report is Dennis Hulett, the Capital Improvement Plan.
Oh, probably should have looked. Hi, everyone. I'd like to thank Maura, Lindsay, and Beth for coming on the tours with me. I'd like to thank Rich George. He's not here tonight, but he's from Durham. That was great. It's good to have you and showing interest in what we do. It really felt good. It'll brighten up in a minute, I think, I hope. Yeah, maybe. Yeah, just maybe.
I think it's getting there, it's just
Yeah,
warming
it's
up,
getting
it's
there.
getting brighter.
So, as part of our strategic goals, I included 2 slides of our goals, my goals moving forward, or my department's goals moving forward. And the first one is to review and update the 20-year capital plan, just to make sure that all items are in there, listed, accurate life cycles for each item, and update the 5 and 20-year capital plans with them posted on the website by the end of December. Part of that moving forward is an allocation of space, and as part of this, and I've been talking to people, and it seems as though we're getting a little tight at Moore Street this coming year, moving forward. So we might have to think about doing something there. We'll talk about it more, I'm sure, in the budget cycle as we hash it out some more. Maybe portable classroom or something. It's getting to that level. It's getting quite crowded. Goal 2 is to provide student transportation that supports participation in extracurricular and curricular programs. I'm going to review all the bus runs. I kind of do that all the time now, but I'm going to do a more in-depth thing. I've been meeting with the drivers and making sure that we have enough buses to do what we need. Again, that'll be done by the end of December with written documentation to the superintendent on my findings. Okay, 2019-20 capital budget projects. Here's the list. We replaced 3 Durham heat pumps. We did an upgrade on Mass Landing elevator, although we'd been doing the work. So there's quite a bit of savings there because we've done a lot of the upgrades through the operating budget as things come up. The Pownell bathroom upgrade in the main hall, if you take a look at that down the main hall, there's a new floor, paint, new plastic, not plastic, but yeah, plastic dividers. They're really nice. They don't rust. They don't, they're easy to clean. It's just a better feeling. And then we replaced the septic tank. Not so glamorous, but it was needed to be done. We're in the process of converting the high school boiler, number 1, to gas. And that's, I'll talk about that a little later, but that's, it's actually going to be a dual fuel boiler, so we'll still have the redundancy that we need in case natural gas, something ever happens. You never know, but we'll still be able to burn oil. We don't have that. We have that ability now, but we don't have any redundancy in the gas line. Central office phone repair, they're in the process of getting that done. High school shades, that's not done yet, but it's all ordered. Saved a lot of money doing that. It's half the cost of that right there. Actually, I got two quotes. One was more than that, and one was half the cost of that. So that worked out. Moore Street hot plates and rolling doors, those are in the process as well. Capital reserves was 10. We have a little bit of extra money, not extra money, I guess I shouldn't say that, but we have a little bit of money from savings that we're talking about doing some more work. We're going to replace the school buses this year. We've got one. We've got another one on the second tier round. We're waiting to hear about that. That's the 3 heat pumps. We got 3 more coming in this fall. They've ordered them. They haven't gone in yet. It takes quite a while to get them. They're kind of special heat pumps, but they're the 3 that they put in are working great. We still have a problem with a few more, but we're doing well. The upgrades were done. We like I said, we did them over the years. It was kind of a surprise. I wasn't expecting them to say, well, really, there's not a lot to do here. I guess that was good news, but we're in good shape there. That's the old dividers. That was the 2 doors that you see. They were actually plywood. Now they're neat. You got a nice floor. It's vinyl. It's not that tile anymore. Not a good situation for a bathroom in a school with pre-K to 5-year. The septic tank, it doesn't look like that at all. It's just grass now. That's where the generator sits. So we have a generator here, and like Lisa said, it saved us 2 days of non-school, and it really did a nice job. And when we started it up and we hooked up what we have hooked up to it, it didn't even bother the thing. I mean, we're talking about actually hooking up some more things to it. So it was nice to be able to have school, and everybody, a lot of places weren't, and we were pretty proud of that. My guys did a great job hooking it up and keeping it fueled, and it's really efficient, and it's great. I love it. So that's the boiler we're converting to dual fuel. It's an old Cleaver Brooks. We're actually converting another one too. In the high school, it's going to cost us $1 because we got efficiency main rebates, and we're going to up the efficiency rating from 89 to 92%, and it's going to cost us $1. I mean, you can't not do it. You have to do that. So the boiler conversion, like I said, it will still maintain dual fuel capabilities in case we ever have a problem with the gas, and it's the redundancy that we really like to see without buying heat and oil, because heat and oil is messy and it's dirty and it's not as efficient, and it's expensive. Central office phone, those will be gone soon. Shades, they're coming. The guy called me the other day. He said they should be in any time now. The rolling door at Moore Street, that we're going to change. So we did a couple other projects over the summer. That's the nurse's office, nurse's lay-down room at the middle school. If you get a chance to go in the middle school, you'll see that we've changed the office around. We broke through a wall, and we made a conference room, and we gave Ray a new office. The assistant principal has a better office, and the nurse has a lot more room. It's kind of similar to what we did here. It really came out great. We took off where the siding is. We took that all off. We had some problems with water infiltrating the building. We thought we'd be better off to do some investigating. And we didn't find much of anything, thank goodness, but we did the work, and now we can sleep at night knowing that we're not growing anything in school. We did the front entry. We changed the front door to Moore Street School. It's got the shatter-resistant glass, so it's the safety glass in case it's not bulletproof, but it's shatter-resistant. So it would take a lot of time. We ordered that with the door when we bought the door, and we removed there was a, I'm gonna point to it. There was a big concrete structure there that was kind of tipping from the frost, and it was putting the water against the foundation. So we yanked that out, and then we repaved the entryway. So kind of building preservation. The last thing you want is water against your foundation. So next year, or this next year, this next cycle, I'm thinking of buying 4 buses. We're retiring the debt of 8 buses because we bought the 8 buses from Durham. So it's a good time to get our fleet to 24 buses, which we're really going to need. And since you guys have all volunteered to get your bus driver licenses, that'll be straight with the drivers. But yeah, it's a good time to do that. We're not adding to the budget. Well, we're not adding to we're actually losing the debt on 4 additional buses. Panel roof over the office. It's one of the last roofs besides Mass Landing that we got to do. 3 more heat pumps. That'll be 9. I'm going to repair the tennis courts one more time. We talked about the tennis courts last time. It needs some work. They need some work. We didn't really go out in the tennis courts enough that when we did it, and I went back and I kind of bugged me, so I took a walk through, and there's a lot of work that needs to be done to repair them. To replace it, it's a couple $100,000, I think, to put the tension, or talking out of school, I don't know how much it costs, but it's expensive. So we decided that we were going to plan for that, reserve for it, and fundraise for it, whatever we had to do. But we're going to take some time, and in the meantime, we'll get it one more fix so they can use it for a few years. Pownell windows. These school windows they've been here since the school was built, and I think they need to be replaced. They're old wooden windows. They're inefficient. Central office windows. I think that price is high. I'm going to revisit that. But the back section, if anybody spent any time in the conference room at the central office on a cold day, it's cold in there. The windows are in bad shape. And then a Pownell split system for the kitchen here. It's in the spring and fall of the year. The kitchen office, there's a heater, freezer, and a cooler in there. And it's a small room, and I'll tell you, it's not 90 degrees in that room. You can't even work in there. So I think we can do better than that, too. I'm going to talk to about 4 or 5 different places that sell those things, and I'm pretty sure we can do a lot better than that. So that's the roof I need to replace here. You can't really see it that great, but so that white strip right there, that's big gobs of caulking, and it's like, that's not good. And I did a walkthrough on it, and it's critical. It needs to be done. The flashing against the building wasn't great, and it's starting to degrade. It's pretty old. I want to say it's about 30 years old, I think. That's the Durham heat pumps we're talking about. That's the tennis courts. You can see the big crack. There's other cracks in it, but that was probably the worst one. There's a lot of hollows out throughout it. That's the windows. That little green thing that's peeling underneath, the price is pretty high for those windows, but that's an asbestos panel, so we got to be careful when we do something like a job like that. We got to make sure that we cover all our bases, and anytime you get into asbestos, you want to be prepared. Those are the windows in the central office that we're going to replace. There's 8 of them. There's 2 or 3 around the corner, and there's 2 in the other corner. That's the office, Pownell office. There's the freezer right there that we're going to put it right up near the exit sign, probably to the left of the exit sign. And we'll just put a small AC unit in there, like a split system. And then the next year, 21, 22, budget, 2 buses, and then the Mass Landing roof. That's a big job. I don't, maybe there's a better way to do it, but that's only a budget figure that I got from the roofing company. When I go to bid, I'm sure I could do better than that, but it needs to be done. It's life of the building right now. It's 30 years old or close to it. And then 22, 23, buses again, high school elevator gets its love, Pownell steamer. So as part of my goal, I'm working on the capital budget, the 20-year plan, and we got a dynamic nutrition director. I think she's great, and she's really, we talk a lot and we collaborate, and we're trying to nail down all the kitchen systems to make sure that she's got what she needs, and they're efficient, and so we're still working on that. That's going to be part of my 20-year, 5-year plan moving forward. It is now, but it's just old information from years of dealing with different directors. The auditorium carpet at the high school needs some work. We're going to need to get a maintenance truck, but I'm thinking we'll get a van. And I got to tell you, there's a reason. I think that if we have a van, we can stock it with parts, and we're not running back and forth to the hardware store. We're not running back and forth to the maintenance shop or getting, it's going to save money if we have a van with the parts that we need, and we're not running back to the hardware store or back to the high school to get some parts. Let's get something that we can, get to the school and fix it and move on to the next job. Mass Landing steam kettle, that's part of the capital plan now. It's anybody's guess if that'll stay on here. Aaron and I are talking about that. Moore Street elevator, that's probably the one that needs the upgrading the most. Mass Landing exterior doors, now we've done the 3 back doors in the lower section. We planned ahead. We have the ability to electrify the hardware, so if we ever decide to go with key cards, all we got to do is buy the device to make it work. But there's a lot of other doors in that school, and they're starting to show their age. We're going to have to paint them, but at some point we're going to have to change them. Middle school replace the siding on additions. The couple of the additions that were built in 2000, they used a hardy board siding, and it's really not holding up as well. And then we have the last Durham heat pump that will be changing, and the capital reserves, of course. 23, 24 looks like a big year. Reside the portable building, a split system for the fitness area at the high school. And I got to remind you guys that the 5-year plan is kind of dynamic. I want to say that every year because this may not look like this next year. It depends on the priority and how things go. Durham Field irrigation, they have some interest about that. The middle school is done. It really looks nice. It's really coming on. The grass looks better than it ever has. Moore Street back path to the bus circle. That's it's not wide enough, and it's pretty. Kids kind of cut the corner. It looks pretty bad. Maintenance mower, Moore Street phone system. We did the public address system, but we didn't do the phone system yet. Mass Landing phone system, we haven't done that. They're starting to get lines that are giving us issues. Pave the playground. I don't know if that's going to make it in this year. It was set for this year, but we kind of do a lot of work around here, so a lot of times the stuff lasts longer than we think. We've remodeled the restrooms out here in the gym area. Carpet, the business office, that was actually due sooner, but I think it can go a little bit longer. rear of school, the middle school, the windows there, and then capital reserves, of course. And then 24, 25, more middle school bleachers, buses, security systems, they're getting old. Fire alarms are getting old, but we do maintain them, and it may change. Front door replacement, I think Moore Street needs a little bit of love in the front door area, and I don't know what that'll involve. Maybe more than a door. Heat controls, we have very limited controls in this building, and I can adjust the heat in any one of our buildings right from my office, except for this building in Moore Street. And I'm not saying that's needed, but it helps a lot because you can schedule your buildings and you're not relying on human beings to turn the heat down at night, and you could do that. I can do that. I can schedule them. It saves a lot of money. Panel heat control, I just said that. Durham replaced the clock system. I don't know. It seems like it's humming right along. 5 years can make a big difference. Increase the parking at the middle school. There is a way to do it. We talked about it. We're in the planning phases of that. I don't know if it'll fly, but it gets pretty tight there, and sometimes when they have functions. Parking lot repairs at Durham. We did some repairs this year. We sealed all the cracks, so we're trying to buy some time. The paving's really in good shape. It probably won't make it. It probably won't be done in 24, 25, but it's on the plan. And I don't really want to take it off until we prove that it can be taken off or moved down. And the key card entry talked about. Well, we didn't talk about, but we have this in Durham. We have this at the high school in the front office, and it's really a good system. Although I talked about the keys in the schools last year. We only have like 6 keys now and get in all our buildings anywhere we want to go. I kind of like that, but key cards are great because you can, when the community rec wants to rent out a room you can issue a card, and it's only good for that day, and you don't have to worry about getting the key back, and you can get the card back. You can charge a little deposit or something if you wanted to. There's ways to do it. And that's it. Except where I want to mention a couple other things, if you don't mind. We have a sustainability committee now, and we met, and we voted on some projects. We voted on some topics that we want to take on, and I think we talked about nutrition being the first project that we want to take on, and how we can be more sustainable in that area. And Aaron came to our meeting and did a great job. With composting at the high school, with composting at Mass Landing, just to give us another year under our belt so we can make sure that we got all the bugs, that's a bad choice of words, but make sure we got all the glitches out of it and we don't have any problems. Straws came up. That's a big deal right now. Silverware came up, a lot of things that we're talking about. And the other thing that gathered a lot of energy is alternative energy. And the next meeting we'll be talking about alternative energy and how that was the second, or one of the choices. I think it was the first choice, wasn't it? The nutrition was the second choice, but we decided to take on two areas this year, so we can handle it. And I think that's all. I promised Becky not to go for 2 hours.
I feel like our see, you are right on time. Very nice, Dennis. I'm just looking at the year where all it is a roof. That year should be pretty quick.
Yeah, you
Fly
think
right
so,
through that
but
one.
You think so, but it's a big roof.
You're going to show us pictures of sections?
Yeah, no, I will. I'll show you pictures. It's ballasted right now. It's got all rocks on it, and we're trying to get away from that because they're really hard to repair in the winter. We do repair that roof a lot. And I should have, if I'd have thought of it, I would have brought some data along. And my boss loves data, and I could have brought, you know, we fixed this roof 20 times last year. I don't know that, that's not, I'm not saying that, but we fixed it a lot, and I wish I'd had gotten some data, you know, because it kind of points you in that direction. You know, you kind of get the gist. You go with the age, and you're always calling the roof company every time it rains hard or snows, or, you know you got an issue, and you really got to pay attention. And I think that's what we do. I don't know if you have any questions, or...
Questions for Dennis? Valley?
Thank you, great presentation.
Thank you.
I was caught by that first comment you made about possibly portables at Moore Street School.
Well, I mean, we're just talking about that right now. We know that we got a big enrollments are increasing, and you know, preschool is getting to be a big deal, and it's getting tight. So we haven't formally sat down and talked about it, but you know, we've talked about it casually, and we're thinking that, you know, probably ought to know that.
No, I'm glad that you're mentioning it, but I'm wondering, long-term, is there an alternative plan being hatched?
Well,
for
that's part of
expanding
the
the
charge that I
space?
have for the capital budget.
Right.
Is part of that is figuring that out, and whether we do a study for enrollments like we did at the high school, you know, and come up with a plan. I think we need to figure out where we are before we go there, but I think we're going to need to go there at some point.
Yeah, and it will take a while to get there when we have a plan.
It'll take a
This
couple of
probably
years,
require a
probably.
bond or something, so,
I did take the time to see what it costs to put a portable. I haven't talked to the town or anything to see if it's feasible, but it's,
town's
you know,
right there.
They lease them with bathrooms, and, you know, it takes a little cash to get them going, but, yeah.
Well,
You can lease it for 24 months. I think it's 1,500 and some change for a month for 24 months.
okay.
Or you
And
can go
just-
longer.
Yeah, and for all the schools, it would be great to just have a projection of where the enrollments are
Right.
going, so we can be more forward-thinking and not
Yep.
get caught last minute trying to create
Well,
temporary spaces for kids.
yeah. Well, what I didn't start with was, that's part of my charge, is to figure that out. I didn't include that on here because I got a lot to do sometimes, and we talked about it, said, you know, let's just do what we can handle. But I think it's coming to the top. I think that's really going to be an issue at some point. So I need to spend some more time with it, and with Becky and Julie and whoever, you know? So we'll prove it out and come back and make a recommendation, I think.
I had 3 questions and you answered 2 of them already, so I'm glad
talk
that
a
people are
lot.
talking about solar. I had hoped to see some solar initiatives in these projected budgets,
Well,
but
I think solar, alternative fuels, I think there's other things too.
and the heat
I think
pumps are good to
solar
see.
that's popular, the prices are going down. The town has entered in some solar projects. We've given our information to one company that does solar, but there's other things to do too, and I think we shouldn't get hung up on one thing. We should think globally and do a bunch of, you know, maybe a bunch of things.
Agreed.
Alternative fuels for the buses maybe, or whatever, you know.
Yeah, that's an exciting one too, electric buses
I
perhaps.
don't know about that, but yeah, maybe.
Uh,
They have them.
And I'm happy to hear Valley's question about Moore Street School. I think we need to be thoughtful about that. I mean, nobody likes portables, but especially not for our littlest kids. But I don't want to spend more time on that. I think, thank you for what you've already said. My only last question is a request. I've been trying to go on that tour for a couple of years and it hasn't worked out for me yet. So I'm hopeful that maybe by June we'll know when next year's tour is going to be, so I
Okay.
can block it on my calendar.
All right,
and be
yeah,
sure to
you
go.
know, I could do better with that. I think I get caught up in the project sometimes, and, you know, and all of a sudden it's September, and how can that be, you know? But yeah, I'll try to do a better job with that and get you that information earlier. I invite all the board members. You don't have to come if you don't want to, but it's kind of interesting, I think. We had fun. Fun, I guess, fun.
Yeah, not to rub it in, but I was going to thank you for the great tour, Dennis. It was nice to see all the, it was really nice. Sorry, Maddie. It was really nice to see all the facilities.
I did get your message, you know, you wanted to go, but you had something to do, and I get it.
So, thank you, Dennis. The
Sure.
one thing I did want to ask about was the Moore Street back path to the bus circle. I know there were like 2 different parts that we saw on the tour, and one was like a smaller area near the door, near the exit door, that looked like more of a tripping hazard.
That's where I'm talking about
Okay.
mostly, yeah.
Okay.
The parking lot, the playground is around the corner, and that's part of it too, but that wouldn't be part of this project. We want to widen that out. It's not, it's hard to take care of right now. And there's a lot of breaking, you know, the stuff's breaking apart, and
Yeah, that's what I
it's
was.
a lot of wear and tear.
Yeah, I was wondering if in the meantime there'd be a way to address the tripping.
Yeah,
problem, but I don't know.
we'll dress up the side of it. My guys are supposed to be doing that. They have a pile of gravel that we ordered a couple of weeks ago, and we're gonna be doing that kind of thing. We have some, loam, whatever you call it, and we've been doing a lot of that kind of work. So, my field guys are usually, fields and grounds guys are pretty on it. I'm pretty proud of those guys. They do a great job for us. Yep.
Valerie?
I just have one quick comment that I'm passing on. I do get comments from middle school parents that they would like the school to be more cheery, and I don't know if something can be done with the color of the paint when you need to repaint it, or lighting more.
I think that's why we painted it that color.
I think you take the middle schoolers out of it, it becomes cheerier.
That would be
It's a
one
really-
solution.
It's hard to, that's a school that requires a lot of tending to. It's that age group, and, you know, they're great, but
They're great.
they're rough. Not all of them, not your kid.
So I only had one question, and you mentioned a little bit on this year's plan about the tennis courts, sort of fixing them one more time. I wasn't sure, you'd mentioned something about trying to set up some kind of reserve going forward. I'm not sure when, I think the repairs we've done in the past have lasted 3 to 5 years.
5.
So we're kind of
Yep.
thinking it's going to have to happen, in this end of this cycle that you've projected
Right.
out for us. Does it make sense to start setting money aside in the reserve, or like how do we get prepared for this? Because we don't want to be 5 years from now doing it again.
No, we'll talk about that during the budget process, I assume, right?
So that would
I
be something
think-
separate from your
Yes.
capital budget. Okay, perfect.
I think when we presented a few months ago, we talked about setting up, Michelle, a separate reserve account starting, so you'll see that in this budget.
Okay, so it'll be sort of like a subset of the capital reserve. It'll be a capital reserve specifically for the
Yeah,
tennis
we've
courts.
done that with the fuel and a couple other things.
And we've
too.
got one for the track and field.
Yep,
And
yep.
Okay, so similar to that. Okay, perfect. I just want to make sure it's in there somewhere.
I think we talked about 35,000.
Yeah, I
I'm going
think
on
that's
my
right.
memory.
You got a good,
Okay,
that sounds right.
thank you.
Anybody else have any questions? Lindsay?
I recall you were going to work with the town to get estimates for solar, or what?
Well, we gave the town our information. That's as far really as it got. Peter's here, we talked about it, we had him come and talk to the group, and Peter Joseph from Freeport. For some reason, it wasn't the right time for us, I guess, to do that. We couldn't get together with where we were gonna put the arrays. It's gonna be a long process to decide how we're gonna set these up. You can't just throw a bunch of solar panels on a roof and call it good. You gotta make sure that roof can support the weight, the snow loads, and, you gotta have room. And just because we have fields doesn't mean we can put, panels on them. So we gotta figure that all out. I don't think we were ready to go there yet. We think that's why we set up the sustainability committee, is to probably do some of this work, and figure that out. But again, it takes time, and there's a lot of little ins and outs about solar. And there's other things to do too. I keep saying that because there's a lot of things out there that will,
I do think that's the reason we set up the Sustainability Committee
Right.
and
right,
at the board request, instead of just going forward with that.
So will that committee provide like estimate numbers? I'm just kind of surprised that we see so many estimate numbers for so many things, and
well,
I think we've been working for a couple of years trying to get more information, and I was just under the impression that talks over the last year were gonna sort of yield some prospective numbers. Like, I don't even have a clue what we're talking about, and you know,
Right.
and we're talking about tennis courts, and like our coastlines are gonna be underwater. I mean, I feel a huge sense of urgency, and I'm not seeing urgent action. But maybe the committee is doing that. I just haven't seen a report from the committee or plans. So I guess I'll say, I would hope to see some sort of like discussion of parameters and numbers and what options might be available to something like to a school district.
I think that's our next
What kinds
step.
of numbers those would be, and I'd like to see that, within the next year. I mean, I don't.
So the committee did brainstorm different directions. I mean, there's a lot of passion on that committee, I will say that, which is wonderful. And there are people who want to move more in the direction of what are we doing in our curriculum. And so we talked about at the committee that we really need to prioritize, and the two priorities, as Dennis noted tonight, was the first one is to explore alternative energy, but my understanding from the board discussion was that they wanted all kind of energies explored. So that's kind of where we're at. And then we had nutrition as the second one, and we felt like we could take on those two topics and do some actionable steps, right? Because the people on that committee, a lot of them want it done yesterday too. But that's where we are. We're kind of in the researching phase right now. And yes, I would expect that within a year, you will be seeing recommendations from us.
Yay.
Okay.
There's a lot more to it than you would think for a side, a school that uses that kind of power. You may not be able to do the whole school. You may be able to, depending on how you deal with that. But there's a lot of studying to do and a lot of work before we can get there. But we'll get there. I promise you we'll get there.
Kate.
Yeah, this isn't as much of a question, but just piggybacking on top of what Lindsay was saying and what Dr. Foley had to say, my interest as well was to see the committee look at things that could also help provide for some of our heating needs as well as our power needs. So I was wanting to know more of whether or not there's the possibility to do some sort of combined heat and power project. So I'm hoping we're exploring all those sorts of things, and that will be included in whatever's presented to us.
Never even heard of a combined heat and power project. Good luck, Sustainability Committee. Maddie.
I hope that the Sustainability Committee is not just looking at new projects, but looking at existing things in the plan and how there might be some cost savings by implementing some of these new ideas for some of those fixes. And this might be pie in the sky, I'm not really sure, but I saw an article recently that the Tesla solar roof tiles are actually going to be available to market finally after a couple years of wait, and that the cost is going to be not prohibitive. Might actually be cheaper than some regular roofing projects. So things like that, I would hope we'd be doing some research on, so that we might actually, re-roof where we need a new roof and maybe get some solar in the process. I know that sounds really simple, and I'm sure it's much more complicated than that, but I hope they're looking at it comprehensively.
Right.
Okay. Any other questions for Dennis? Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, Michelle, Finance Committee, or Finance Report, Administrator Report.
The other finance.
The other finance.
So if you look at the purple form that you have in your folder, this is through the end of October, and if you compare us to October last year, we're within 1% of where we were last year. So I feel very confident in where we are. Nothing in the horizon that I can see that would be, that's troubling or, that I should bring to your attention, because there's nothing out there at this moment. I will say that our new HR person started today, so yay, because I've been in HR mode for about 2.5 weeks now. She's wonderful. Her actual name is Catherine Barnum, but she goes by Holly, and I highly recommend you all try and come in and meet her. She's wonderful. And also our new payroll person, Gail, is fabulous as well, so she's coming on board really quickly. There was one other thing the audit. I'm in the midst of finalizing the audit at the moment. We're in the very last couple of things that we need to do, so I'm hoping to have some final numbers to you very quickly. So that's my report.
Questions for Michelle? Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, 10, board comments and committee reports, board information exchange, and agenda requests. I think, Maura, did you have one that you wanted to share? Yeah.
Yeah, I actually had two. I wanted to mention that I emailed the board about an event in the town of Freeport, and I wanted to share that with anyone who may be watching or community members attending. So the town of Freeport's working group to welcome new Mainers asked me to share with our school community that we're holding an upcoming event welcoming new Mainers in our community, or the town is. The purpose of this event will be to provide information on asylum seekers and community resources, and several organizations, including RSU 5 community programs, will be on hand to share information about the work that they're doing in the community with this population. So we wanted to share that with the school community. It will take place on Thursday, November 7th at 6:30 at the Freeport Library, and it will also be televised, so you can watch from home as well if you can't make it. And then the other thing I wanted to share with the board is I had an opportunity last month to attend a racial equity workshop run by the Racial Equity Institute, and I went on behalf of the RSU, and I was very grateful to have that opportunity. Maine Coast Waldorf School offered it, and several educators from that school attended, and there were also some Falmouth educators there too, so it was nice to see other schools in the community participating as well. So it is offered almost every month or on a regular basis in Portland. So I just wanted to share. I found it really valuable. It focused on, there was a lot of history of racism and how it was institutionalized and perpetuated by policies, and sort of as people who are in positions of power, how we can sort of change that going forward. And there was also a lot of important information about implicit bias and other things around race. So it was one of the most valuable trainings I've ever had an opportunity to attend. It's a weekend-long training, and it's a very sort of serious subject matter, but the presenters are so engaging and so knowledgeable and amazing. It really just, I thought it kind of flew by, so I wanted to just highly recommend it.
Great, thank you. Any other report outs from committees or requests? Share? All right, moving right along. Finance Committee. Kate.
Hello. So we met October 9th and 15th, and both of those meetings were solely devoted to what we're going to be presenting to tonight on the cost sharing formula. I don't really have anything more to update in regards to that. I'm just checking here. I don't think we covered anything else. Probably signed warrants at one of these meetings, but that's about it.
All right. Strategic Communications. Candy.
Okay, the Strategic Communication Committee met on October 11th, and Becky brought a draft to us of the Workplace Satisfaction Survey, which you all will be getting not too long from now, I don't think. And anyway, we worked on that. The survey breaks it down by school. It reports on each school, both from teachers and ed techs. And as you heard Lisa say, the principals will be using, and leadership teams using this information. It reports on participation rate, which might not be quite as high as we would have liked, but a lot of people answered. And it talks about the strengths and the opportunities for growth in each school. And I will say, in system-wide, district-wide, there were two things that came to head. One is that there's an overall positive response to there being effective structures in the schools to support academic learning of students, and that schools feel they have adequate material resources to support the learning of students. And it took us a while. We didn't get to one of the other things on the agenda, which was beginning to work on strategic goal 3.1, which we will be doing next. And that has to do with looking at all of the methods that school information gets out to communities. And we'll look at that and see where we go from there on that. That's from that committee.
All right, thank you. I love that you just gave us a little tidbit to whet our appetite on what's
Yes.
going to come in the rest of the results.
And they're wonderful pie charts, too, that are effective.
I love a good chart, Candy. Okay, policy. Candy.
Okay. The policy committee met on September 22nd, I guess it was, and we reviewed 6 policies, some of which are coming to you tonight. 3 that didn't have any changes: the visitors to school, relationships with law enforcement, and law enforcement authority administration procedures. Anyway, there were no changes to those. The service animals in school is coming to you with the first read, and the system-wide student code of conduct is being revised and will brought in. That's coming today as well. The one thing that we talked about a little more than some of the other policies, so that we have to look at it again, is the Board of Directors' powers and responsibilities. So we'll be looking at that again at a meeting, and that will be coming to you. So there were some changes in that, and we need to talk about it some more. So that's pretty much it.
Okay, so the nice, smooth transition to policy. Do you want me to get a motion first? Before you go into changes? Do you want me to get for the first read?
Sure.
Okay. So could I have a motion for consideration and approval for the following policies first read? IMGA, service animals in schools. Candy? Mara, thank you.
Thank you. Okay. So we have one policy for first read. And this policy that we had was very old, and so I had a conversation. I got the sample policy from MSMA, and I actually ended up having a conversation with Charlotte Bates at MSMA, and a lot of what we had, the way it was written, is no longer legal. There have been court cases over the last few years that have caused our language to be sorely outdated. So what we decided as a policy committee was just to strike out our current policy. So that's why you see that first, our original policy is all struck out. And the policy that we're presenting tonight is right after it. Everything is underlined in the policy. And it's pretty straightforward. It sets the definition clearly of what a service dog is and what it isn't, and it specifically states the purposes of the service dog, and it does allow us to address any concerns that would cause, safety concerns in terms of the animal's behavior. So I think that this just cleans it all up. It makes it legal language, and I'm recommending it as is. It's exactly as the sample was written, with one exception. We changed the Director of Special Education to Director of Instructional Support, because that's what we call ours. And the only other thing is I didn't cross out on the end, that cross-reference on the last page. We don't have an animals in schools policy, so IMG should actually be crossed off, because we don't have that policy, or a policy for that. And it's not a required policy to have that either.
Okay, any questions on that one? All right, then let's have a vote on the first read. All those in favor? None opposed. Thank you.
Great, thank you. All right, so the
So,
next.
do you want me to
Oh,
get
yes,
you a
make
motion
a
for the
motion,
next
yes,
one?
sorry, thank you.
Motion for consideration and approval for the following policy second read: ADA, School System Goals and Objectives, BCA Board of Directors Member Code of Ethics, JIC System-Wide Student Code of Conduct, JJIF Student Concussion and Other Head Injuries, and JJIF-E RSU 5 Concussion Information Sheet. Valerie, thank you. Mara, second. All right.
Okay, so you have seen these policies before. School system goals and objectives, when it came to you for first read, there were no recommended changes. The next policy, BCA, and Mara, I'm going to ask if you wouldn't mind. I just handed Mara, we created a form, which is not going to be part of the policy, but it's a signature form to go with this policy so that you can review. I did share it with the policy committee for their input. The changes that you had asked to be made on this policy from our first read, the first paragraph, changing the word me to them. And so we took care of that. And then the only other change from first read is in that last paragraph. It says the board shall read. I think we had review there before. And so those were the two changes on that policy. So what's coming around to you, were there not enough? Oh, I apologize. Okay. So what's coming around to you is just if we do adopt the policy, that this would be the form that would be signed at the retreat or orientation as a sign-off, instead of signing the bottom of the policy like we did this time. Okay, then no-
You have a question on that one?
I mean, I apologize, I didn't pick up on this before the first read, but
Yep.
When you changed everything to each board member shall, and you struck out I will, then every letter or paragraph from there on needs to be rewritten so that every I will be changed to he or she, and that every my goes to his or her. The conjugation of the verbs, I believe, and he or she believes. So there are a lot of little things like that, and pretty much every single paragraph has those tweaks that
I
need
see
to
what
be
you're
made.
saying.
So I can just give you this with the
Yeah.
corrections
Good
after the
catch.
meeting.
Okay. I feel like that's sort of
Yeah, we-
non-material to content, so just for the final, yeah, okay. Mara?
I also just don't think this is material to content, but I just had a question about N, where we said, welcome and encourage cooperation and participation by teachers, administrators, and other personnel in developing policies. And I was wondering if any of those people are on the policy committee, or otherwise, like how as board members we do that. I was just curious. That's more of a question than a change.
So how do
Any policy that impacts like the nurses,
Yes.
then Cynthia reaches out to the nurses?
they're invited to the
As
policy
an,
committee meetings?
that was a
and they're-
recent
yeah,
one.
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, we good with code of conduct?
All right, on the
All right.
next one, the policy committee just wants to focus on, we've talked about, this is the fourth time, I think, that we've brought this one to second read, so we are just focusing today, if you go to page 6 of 7, letters H, I, letters H, 1 and 2, and then I. So, at the policy committee meeting, we invited Dr. Violet to attend because I think if you remember, When this came up last time, there was a public comment regarding restraint, which is a totally separate policy. So we asked Bonnie to come to the meeting and be part of the discussion with us, and she reviewed and has brought this evening, if you care to see, the restraint policy, or if you have any questions for her regarding the difference. But what I'd like to show you tonight is the changes that the policy committee did make. So this is around the conduct for all students across the district. And so there are times when students might have behavior concerns or issues that would require or might take us to a different level where we're making a referral. So, we added, in some cases, that first line, in some cases a student may be referred for a special education evaluation, really just to determine more what might be the cause, or is there a cause that we don't know about. So we're trying to dig deeper. And that the rest of it was already there. The school unit has adopted policies and procedures for determining when a student shall be referred. And then in the second section, we added if they already have an IEP and they've had some behavior issues. So we added that for students with disabilities. So those are already identified, that the rest of that process will take place. So I'm just trying to clarify why these are in here, because they're all of our students. This includes all students, and this is what we might have to go to next. And then the last paragraph, referrals to law enforcement authorities, you know, that's never a first, second, or third choice. It's sometimes necessary. And so we do have to use this on occasion, not often at all, but when we do, we want to be clear that this is sometimes happens, and so parents know that this can happen. So that's why these three are embedded in this policy. And do you want to come up in case they have questions?
So quick question, the fact that we have Officer McManus at the high school,
Correct.
does that mean that the fact that he's present there and may see things that are happening in the school, but the administrator may not choose to refer to law enforcement, automatically makes it a referral to law enforcement because he's there seeing things? Or how does that work? Can he see something and not act on it as a law enforcement officer?
If he saw something, can you be more specific?
Right, so if he saw a student using drugs,
right,
for example, it's illegal, but the administrator may decide, you know, this is the first time I see this happen, this student may be going through some difficult times, I'm gonna let this one go, I'm not gonna refer to authorities this first time around, but the officer is there seeing it. How does that get worked out?
It goes through the administration first, you know, so that we have steps and policies that we go through. And then if it's a decision is made that we need to involve authorities, it's already laid out in policy, that then Dr. Foley is informed, and then.
But the point is, if he's already there and he sees it, is it automatically a referral to law enforcement because he is law enforcement?
Yeah.
Right, can he as law enforcement basically ignore what he just saw and not respond as a law enforcement official?
Yeah. Yeah, I think I'm going to write that question down and, you know.
Waiting for my phone to buzz.
Get you,
Ginny's watching.
yeah, she probably, yeah. So I'm going to write the question down to get you the answer to that.
I mean, I would say that typically law enforcement has the discretion, right? I mean, I think we've all been on the highway, maybe going a few miles an hour over the speed limit, and a cop passes you. They don't pull you over every time. They have discretion, but I don't know how it relates in the, you know, the connection with the schools.
I would say the norm is what Cynthia is saying, is that it would flow through administration unless there's some type of imminent danger, right?
So the last time we looked at this policy, that section on Section G, removal of disruptive, violent, threatening students, I know that I saw that there was that separate policy that you mentioned, Cynthia, about seclusion and restraint, and it's very detailed and specific, and much more detailed and specific than what is here. So I thought we were going to incorporate that by reference and remove this section. Was there, and did we is there a specific reason to keep it this way, or would it make more sense to just refer to that separate policy? 6, or the bottom of
The
5.
title is on 5, but all the info is on 6G,
Is on
right?
6, yeah, and we had talked about, I think sort of probably the problem of talking about it in June and then looking at a policy again in October, because over the summer, so we had talked about this, and then I kind of had forgotten that we did.
Section G.
I think maybe the reason we would keep it in is because I don't think everything would fall into that seclusion and restraint, right? Because there are other options or opportunities that they have here. I mean, I think 3 specifically refers to that, but I'm not sure if the other ones we'd want to pull out.
I mean, number 1 doesn't specifically say seclusion, but the last sentence says escorted to the office or other designated location. So I would assume that could mean a seclusion room.
But it also could be that it's not. And I would
Yeah.
say at the high school is probably, and maybe involving the SRO. I mean, that would be an example of where it wouldn't be a seclusion. And Bonnie, I think you can speak to, well, so I hesitate for you to get into really explaining restraint and seclusion, because don't we have a workshop coming up on it where we're explaining that in more detail? I feel like that was a request that will be coming up, because
Yeah, there is one coming up like in December, beginning of December.
because I'm just thinking about what's on our agenda, and I just, I don't know, unless you feel like you can say something really brief, Bonnie,
Well,
around seclusion and restraint.
So the seclusion policy that we have is really separate from the student code of conduct. And it really is, it applies to maybe a handful of students in our district, where the student code of conduct really is more applicable to all of the students. And the reason that it applies to a handful is because there are very prescriptive, ways and procedures to address students that need a seclusion. So the staff that do the seclusion with the student, they have to be trained in de-escalation techniques before they go to a hold or a seclusion. There are ways to escort a student. The attorneys, Drummond Woodson, just came out with, basically a description of what a seclusion is, because there was some misunderstanding in the state of Maine, in other districts, about what a seclusion is. And so, it's a much more narrow policy than the student code of conduct. So I don't know if that answers your question, but.
Yeah, thank you. I
Does
just
it?
I'll let you go ahead and then.
I was going to just add that was, we talked about that in the policy meeting, and I think that was what we were trying to get at with H, is that that policy that Bonnie's talking about, the student would have to be under an IEP. Is that correct?
Well, not
Or
necessarily.
identified?
Not
for special
necessarily
services?
under an IEP.
Okay.
It's just, if the student has out of control behavior, there are just very, it's very scripted what you have to do to meet that student's needs.
Okay, so they wouldn't necessarily be falling under for students with disabilities or referred for special education? Because I
Right.
thought that was the point of that section, was to trigger the circumstances under which you would have to follow that seclusion, the other policy for seclusion and restraint.
Well, I think the purpose for Section H is really for some students that are not in special ed, it might trigger a referral, which means we would do special ed evaluations to determine, I think, as Cynthia said, what the cause might be. And then for other students with IEPs, even if we're using, restraint or seclusion, we would have an IEP meeting to take a look at, the incident itself and what caused the need for a restraint. Because the intent is to prevent that from happening. You don't want to keep restraining or secluding students. And so, once it's, if we do it once or twice, we have to have a meeting to take a look at what can we do differently to address the students' needs. And that's where the restraint policy comes in.
Okay. Do we have, yeah, Lindsay?
Just quickly, not a content, but on page 1, I would just think you would want the bullets under B, Code of Conduct, to be capitalized so it matches A.
Yep. Oh. But that's the finish of a sentence. See? I think there's a little difference. That's a finishing of a sentence. The code applies to students on school property. Do you see? At the above, it's just a list. Okay, ready to the next.
Sorry, just have one more. On page 2 of the policy, under letter C, item 7, it talks about school standards for grooming and dress, and grooming was removed from that on page 2.
Oh, I think that we had talked about that one a long time ago. Yeah, and I think, Maddie, if you want to address it, I think the term was
I just think
antiquated.
it's outdated. So.
Antiquated term. So that's why, yeah.
Right.
We can't
But
make them cut their hair.
Was there discussion of removing number 7 entirely?
We have a dress code,
So-
right?
Each
No.
school has one, so. Because I think there is, I do hear from parents on concerns over, is it appropriate to have a dress code? So we should, I wonder if that will come up in the future.
Maybe.
But I think while we have them, it probably belongs in here. And then if we got rid of them, then maybe it gets pulled. All right, any other questions or comments on code of conduct? All right, so we are up to concussion.
Okay. So, from the discussion at our last meeting, page 1, the very bottom paragraph, section C, the changes from first to second read, we added in the second line in the very last paragraph at the end of that line, a licensed healthcare provider, ideally one, those 2 words were added. And ideally one trained in concussion management, to give you the context. And then on the last sentence, let's see, we have, and in all, well, right in the middle of that third line, or let's start at the beginning. Discretion of the concussion management team, comma, and in all cases, we crossed out should be, and we had is, based on the districts. We added the word districts, current accepted standards of care, and then we added from first read to this one, at the discretion of the concussion management team per your recommendations. And that was the only change on that one from first read. And then I'll go right to the next one, because we were talked about having the parallel language in the information sheet. So on page 2 of 2 of the concussion information sheet, the paragraph that starts any student who is suspected, where you see the underlined part at the end of that paragraph, we added the ideally one in there, is based, and the district's current accepted standards of care. So those were the changes that you had asked us to make.
It's just a little one, but discretion at the bottom of page 1 doesn't need to be capitalized. Sorry, I missed that before. Third line from
Yeah,
the
I should have
bottom.
picked up on that when I started to read it. Thank you.
just to make it sound more consistent, I think it should say such return to participation will be gradual and at the discretion of the concussion management team, and in all cases will be based on the districts accepted, just to keep it consistent with the tense, yeah.
And that same correction needs to happen on page 2 of 2, where you added that same sentence, ideally one trainer will be based on the district current accepted standards of care, and wondering if you shouldn't add there too, at the discretion of the concussion management team. Page 2. Right.
Phrase "at the discretion of the concussion management team" is used twice in one sentence. I think it may be in there accidentally twice. Did you mean such return to participation will be gradual, comma, like skip that phrase there, because it's already at the end of the sentence. Such return to participation will be gradual and in all cases is based on the district's current accepted standards of care at the discretion of the concussion management team. Like, where is that phrase supposed to be? Because it's two places in one sentence. I think you want the second one and not the first one. You disagree? Oh, you disagree?
I think the first one should be there, and then it should just end at standards of care, period.
Okay, I could go with either. But not both.
Both seems a little redundant.
Both, I'm like, what are we saying? I don't even know what we're talking about.
They're important.
Okay, so I need to know what you finally decided on the two sets. Keep the first one, okay.
Oh, delete the second one, yes. Okay, delete the second one.
Okay.
So if you do that there, would you do the same thing on the page 2 of 2 and add it in of the second on the information sheet?
Yeah, well, you don't have it at all.
Right, that's why I was wondering if.
The plan was to add it
Yep.
once on the.
Right.
Okay.
Yep, I got that.
Okay.
And we're changing the "is" that we formally decided on to "will be" on both. Okay. Perfect.
Okay, so I don't feel like any of those second reads require any follow-up work other than
Right.
these minor
Fixes from tonight.
capitalization and grammar issues, so I think we're ready for, yes, Maddie? Oh, we already moved it. Yeah, you're already voting, Maddie. So I just want to make sure nobody has any questions on any of those we just did for second read, because we're gonna vote them as a slate. All those in favor?
Thank you.
Opposed? Kate, did you vote? I'm sorry. You did, oh, okay. I just looked this way and started down. All right.
Thank you.
Okay. Yes.
I'm sorry, maybe it would have been appropriate for me to ask this when the policy committee was reporting. I just had the question about whether any changes in Maine law would be considered in policies coming up this year, because at the end of last year, we had reviewed our discrimination and harassment policies, and the policy committee had recommended no changes, and I had said I had some changes, and then those got passed into law. So I know we had just reviewed it, but
It might belong back on the docket thanks to the state law?
that's what I was wondering, yeah.
So, when all those legislative changes occur, and I think in one of Dr. Foley's board updates, she included some of the law changes that had happened. That was just a little small sampling. And you could see that I kind of just summarized it really quickly, said what the impact is, informing, communicating, policy update, policy review. And so that's always the case. And so what happens is at the end of every single year, the policy committee gets together. We have a 5-year plan to review all of our policies. And so then we kind of prioritize them at the end of the year and we go through them. And the other things that happen simultaneously is we have these law changes that happen, and we get communicated with all the time. I'm always updated with that, all the law changes and the information. And there are times when we know there's going to be a change, like the immunization that's going back to the voters in March, for example. So I wouldn't move to reopen that policy until after that point, right? And so there are others that are recommended that we prioritize and get underway. There are others that rule changes need to be made by the DOE, and then we'll get a sample policy. So I hesitate to rush to change policies to be like really quickly right after a law changes in general, because I know that in another 6 months or in another 4 months, either there's going to be a sample policy that comes out that has been vetted through Drummond-Woodsum, or that there are going to be rule changes. And so I just wanted to generalize and answer that question in a more general way, but we will still put it on our list and make sure that it does get addressed. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, that's really helpful. Thank you.
Okay. So, we are going to move on to, I don't know what number it is on our agenda. Unfinished business. No, what are we calling it? Yeah, unfinished business. The presentation from the Finance Committee on the recommended cost-sharing methodology. So, we're having, you're going to display it up on the screen, Michelle? Yeah?
Yes.
Okay. In your packets is the full copy, no, not the full copy, the copy that was emailed out. And then we have some handouts to go along with it when we get to the recommendation stage.
I was gonna sit, but I might stand just because the screen's behind me.
Okay. Yeah, it is behind you.
I don't know if I can multitask like that, though. Maybe I can. Yeah, for my stuff.
Michelle, could you move your computer over by the projector? And then that would give her the podium.
Perfect. Are you able to change, you want the chair back?
Yeah. There you go. Thanks.
Okay. Hello, everyone. I'm Kate Brown, Finance Committee Chair. I'll be presenting the first couple slides tonight. Then we'll also share responsibilities with Jeremy Clough and Michelle Richardson, who are also members of the Finance Committee. And so tonight we're going to be presenting to the board on the RSU 5 cost-sharing methodology, which was first established at the creation of the RSU, and it's all stated within the reorganization plan, which is dated September 11th, 2008. So back in January 2018, the RSU board directed the Finance Committee to undertake an evaluation of the cost-sharing method and determine whether changes should be made, and then provide our recommendation to the board on what those changes should be. So first, go back a slide. We're going to give you a brief review of the timeline associated with our work, including the various topics we researched, as well as the overarching goals we established as a result of input from town leadership and this board approximately 1 year ago this month been a long year of, what we were doing was, while we used the overarching goals to guide our work, we also had certain criteria or factors that we were considering as we evaluated the current cost-sharing formula, some of which are outlined specifically in the reorganization plan. Others we solicited from town leadership, and some were from the board. We'll also do another brief overview tonight of the cost-sharing method that we did at our last meeting. It's going to be much more high level, so and brief, one slide. And how it's defined in the reorganization plan. Okay, so next slide. So here is just an overview of our timeline of what we've been working on since the January 2018. As I mentioned, back in January 2018, Finance Committee was directed by the board to undertake an evaluation of the current cost-sharing methodology, and we held a series of meetings with town leadership in the spring of 2018 and solicited their input on the criteria they'd like us to consider as we conducted our work. And at the request of town leadership, we followed up these meetings with written request just to further give a more detailed, firm request, clearer explanation of what we were looking for from them, and then they responded by giving us a series of letters, which were included in the agenda as handout number 1. Those are these here. So we've got series of letters that we received through summer and fall of 2018, and the final letter being received in October of 2018. And then, can go to slide 4 now. It was at the October 2018 board meeting where we invited town leadership to then present on their letters, and the board at that time provided further direction to the Finance Committee on what we've coined as overarching goals for our work. And it was then that we turned our efforts from like more outreach type work to fact finding and research, and then ultimately deliberation on the pros and cons of the current formula and what factors we thought could improve it. Okay, next slide. In the fact-finding phase, we researched how the current funding methodology works and how state funding works. We researched state law and how that drives the essential programs and services allocations and minimum special education adjustment. We reviewed the section on cost sharing in the reorganization plan. We contacted former members of the reorganization planning committee finance subcommittee. So it wasn't the whole RPC committee that we contacted. They had a subcommittee that was focused solely on the financial aspects of the plan. Those are the people that we contacted, members from each town. And I think we got in touch with all of them, either email or through phone. We also reached out to Tyler Backus, who I mentioned at our last meeting. I do have his title, School Finance and Compliance Coordinator at the Maine Department of Education. I can do the next slide, and that's Jeremy.
So as the definite newest member of the committee, I was really grateful that the goals for the committee were very clear, and lots of work went into creating the goals, but then explaining why we wanted to do them. In looking back at the prior formula, there's no doubt that a ton of work went into the prior formula, and it's held up remarkably well, even though we're 12 years into the formula. But it's not very transparent. It's difficult to understand. It takes pretty much a year to fully understand all how the pieces go together. And to school members and members of the community, that's really not fair to take that long to understand and describe something. So that was no doubt the number one reason in my mind why it made sense to look at the formula. The second is we wanted to make it variable, because right now there are no factors that are variable at all, so make it available so that as things change, the amounts could change. And then the two others are what is fair. And I think in looking back at the committee, like I said, it was remarkably well done how the prior one was, but it's still difficult to explain exactly how that all worked out in some ways. And very importantly, we feel strongly that the district is performing very well right now. Of course, there's improvement happening, and there's always going to be room for improvement, but we didn't want to sort of make this a burdensome impact on any one town in order to help to maintain district unity.
Okay, so for this slide, you might want to pull out handout number 2 and 3. So handout number 2 is the FAQs that kind of accompany the RPC agreement, or I keep abbreviating it, it's the reorganization plan agreement. And then handout number 3 is just an excerpt from the plan. It's the pertinent section on cost sharing, that's section 13B. So this is the slide I was talking about that's just going to be kind of a high-level summary of what you all reviewed at the last meeting. I want to clarify from what we learned last meeting, just 2 basic concepts, I guess, is what I'm going to cover here. It's they all relate, both of them relate back to section 13B of the plan. And the first concept is that the one that each municipality must meet the mill expectation rather than the calculated mill on the ED 279. And that's established under the definition of total required local contribution in our plan. It differs slightly from required local contribution, which is number 1. So we have got required local contribution at number 1 here, and then you've got a term known as the total required local contribution defined in the plan. It's different in that the total required local contribution is both required local contribution, and then a portion of it is under local cost sharing, which is the amount raised above the required local contribution to meet the mill expectation, or we call it a few things. It's either the applicable mill rate, that's the term used in the plan, which is also called the full value mill rate. You'll all see different concepts. The other portion of the local cost sharing, so not only part of the local cost sharing is covered under the total required local contribution, there's another part, which is the additional local money, which we're all familiar with. That is the, the usual percentages that we see on our budget documents. It's actually on the next slide too. The second concept is that of sharing the minimum special education adjustment among the 3 municipalities, okay? This is the part of the definition, this is part of the definition of total outside contribution, so it's not as straightforward. When you read our plan, you wonder where in the plan does it say that the minimum special education adjustment should be shared by all 3 towns. It's buried in that definition of total outside contribution to RSU. It includes the subsidy, which we talked about last time, the minimum special education adjustment, and then any other adjustments such as the regionalization and efficiency assistance. All right. And then the total outside contribution is also part of the definition for additional local money in our plan. So that's where to determine what is divided amongst us according to the additional local money formula, you have to deduct the total outside contribution. So that's why the minimum special education adjustment comes off first, and then the money's put through the ALM. Next slide. Okay, this is the cost-sharing formula. This is what we are mostly familiar with when we talk about cost-sharing. I think it's pretty obvious now that this is just a portion of the cost-sharing. We've got what we've decided to term as cost-sharing method, which is this entire presentation includes things like total outside contribution to the RSU, total required local contribution, and then you've got the cost-sharing formula, which really only applies to the additional local monies. Those are the percentages we're all familiar with. Those are the ones that are somewhat confusing, I think, to folks as to where they come from. They don't ever change. These are the ones I think that Jeremy was speaking to in particular, that we feel like there's probably a need to have a more clear sense of where these numbers come from, and that they should probably change on a year-to-year basis. What was the other thing I wanted? There's one other point I wanted to make on those. I think that's good. Oh, yes. So in your handout number 2 in the FAQs, there is a section on that that actually explains where those percentages come from. Now I had it here. And where those are based out of is number 4, and you can see my little footnote there. Number 4 and number 6 in the FAQs explain how they came up with those percentages when they formed the RSU. They're based on like a 2007, 2008 pro forma budget that the committee had put together, that it was made up of the 3 different school districts' budgets at the time, and they just put them together and determined what each town was raising as a percentage of the total in additional local monies above and beyond what the state was requiring them to raise to receive their state funding. So it was those percentages that they then set here, and that's where they originated. I think it's next slide.
So as Kate mentioned, or I mentioned before, we set the goals of the committee, and then we said, okay, what is the current formula? How does that look against the goals? And as we already talked about, it's not transparent or easy to understand the current formula as it is. It's not at all variable. It's very much set in stone. But in looking at how other districts' formulas work out, and talking with some of the attorneys who helped form the policy back in the day and former members, it appears to have stayed remarkably fair. So that was part of the reasoning behind going with the formula. And secondly, also in comparing to other districts, it seemed to be not burdensome the way things ended up with the current one. So that helped play into how the new formula was created.
Okay, so I think what we decided what we decided from that last chart on slide 9 about where are the perceived weaknesses in our formula, not easy to understand, not overly transparent, doesn't change over time, but we feel like overall fair and balanced across the district. So what do we want to do to change it? And how do we change it? Because it's actually laid out in the reorganization plan how to go about changing the cost sharing methodology. And so what it says, and it's in that handout 3 that you guys have, but the RSU board shall consider all factors it deems relevant, but it must consider the following. So fairness of the method in light of valuation, representing each municipality's ability to raise revenue, population, representing each municipality's board representation on the budgeting process, and head counts, representing each municipality's usage of the facilities and the programs. So that's the first thing we have to consider when we're looking at changing the cost-sharing formula. We also have to consider the effect of the cost-sharing method on the RSU's ability to raise sufficient funds to sustain the programming that we're providing for the kids in the best interests of RSU 5 students. We have to make sure that there's clarity of method, including ease with which the public can understand the method and avoidance of uncertainty over the method's application. So it should be easily understandable, as easily understandable as school finance can be. And it should be pretty clear on how those numbers are pulled and how the formulas work, so people can understand what it's going to mean year to year. Consistency of the method with the operation of the RSU as a single cohesive entity. Back to Jeremy's point on trying to keep the unity in the district moving in the right direction. You know, that we don't want to institute a change to the cost-sharing formula that essentially sets off a bomb in the district. And then the effect of the method on the stability of the revenue streams and the local taxpayer obligation. So the goal of trying to smooth out the changes over time, so there aren't huge variations year to year for any one or all of the towns. So those are what we're required to do as we look forward to changing the cost-sharing methodology. And so now we're down to, okay, well, what levers, that's sort of the term we used in our discussion, what levers can we pull in this methodology to be more transparent, to be variable, but to maintain the good things that we like about our formula. And you'll recall there's really two portions of the cost, the methodology, right? There's that above the line number where Kate talked about the required local contribution, and the adjustments that the levers you can pull there are the minimum special education adjustment. How is that accounted for? Is it all applied to the town that gets the minimum special education adjustment, or is it put in with subsidy? So you'll recall from 2 weeks ago, maybe you'll recall, so minimum special education adjustment is for towns that are minimum receivers from the state, which means their valuation, when you apply the mill expectation, when you multiply those two numbers together, the amount that they could raise with that mill expectation is more than the state says it costs to provide the minimum services for the students of that town. So they aren't getting a subsidy, essentially. But they do say that, well, we understand that while you may not get a subsidy, we do want to provide some funding for special education. So they go through and say, okay, based on your special education costs, you'll get this minimum adjustment. So you don't see it under subsidy, but you see this minimum special education adjustment. It's a kind of a quirky thing in that this was put in place as sort of a carrot for towns when they were consolidating, to make sure to try and not take away something that some towns may have been getting in the past. So what they said is if you were receiving it in 07 or 08, just prior to the consolidation year, then you can continue to get it. If you weren't getting it in either of those 2 years, you'll never get it, right? So in our district, that's Freeport. Pownell and Durham were both receiving subsidy in those years, so there was no special education adjustment. So that is strictly a Freeport item. And we went through and pulled all of the RSUs that have towns that have at least one member, but not all of the members, because there's 3 or 4 where every member of the district is a minimum receiver, in which case it's not really applicable because it sort of flows all the way through because there's no subsidy. But there are 4 districts where one member, at least one, but not all, get the minimum special education adjustment, and how they account for it differs between the 4. So it's not consistent across the 4. Obviously, we are one of those 4. But so those are the that's the lever for special minimum education adjustment. Do we want to apply it as just income into the pot, or do we want to allocate it to the town of Freeport? And then we're back to the idea of the equalized mill, right? So do we have the calculated mill rate, the applicable mill rate, or now I've confused myself on what's the one that, so mill expectation is the full mill rate, right? So last year that was 8.28. And then, but the calculated mill rate is just what, in our case this year, it's just Freeport it applies to, just what Freeport would have to raise to meet that minimum bar according to the state, right? So do we want to use equalized mill, or do we want to use the calculated mill rate? So those are the levers on that side of the formula. And what those levers really dictate is how much money flows then through the additional local monies formula, okay? So right now, last year, I want to say it was 9 and change, I've got the form here somewhere, flowed through our ALM formula, the 21, 65, 12, right? And then, so that's how much flowed through. These are the things that could adjust that number up or down. And then once we figure out the ALM number, then it's, okay, well, how do we divvy that piece up, right? So those are the numbers that right now are static at those percentages that we talked about earlier. So what are some things we could think about that we might want to put in as factors that would create that variability in our formula that we're hoping to achieve here? So handout number 4. Yes, handout number 4 is just some of the factors. Actually, it's all of the factors you see in this right-hand column here with some pros and cons and how we looked at all of those items. Valuation and pupil count rose to the top as having the most pros, and a reasonable amount of cons associated with them. Valuation is one of the biggest pros for valuation is obviously it's consistent with how statewide practice for allocating burden. All other taxes on the municipal level are based on that valuation number. It's easily accessible, comes right off the ED 279, and it's indicative of the ability to pay. Some of the cons are it doesn't account for usage, and valuation doesn't always necessarily correlate with income of the residents. And then pupil count is the other one that you see most frequently as another factor. And the pros of that is it is a driver of usage. It is also easily understood. I think everybody gets how many kids are from each town. And it's also readily available right off the ED 279. Every year we have to supply that to the state as of October 1st by town. The cons of it is it could create some drastic swings as changes in students moving in and out could create some dramatic swings. And it also doesn't take into account efficiencies and overhead, right? So the cost to educate one kid in one town based on the overhead might be very different than the cost of educating a student in another town based on the overhead that they have in the school or schools. So, and then there's a variety of other ones that we looked at based on conversations with the board, based on looking at other formulas. I think Kate mentioned it a little bit earlier. We did look at the RSUs and how they calculate what they're using in terms of cost-sharing factors. And I would say the majority, I would say the vast majority, I think we're looking at probably 15% or less, don't use some form of valuation and or valuation pupil count, right? So 58% of the RSUs in the state are straight valuation, and that was actually how the law was originally written for consolidation. It was not meant to have all of these confusing formulas. They just said, okay, it's straight valuation. And then that raised issues because of the specifics of a variety of districts. So they said, okay, well, if you guys can come up with your own formulas based on what makes sense for your districts. But 58% of them did go with straight valuation. And then another 25 to 30% went with some
version of a percentage valuation and a percentage for your pupil count. Okay, so what are we recommending? Where'd Kate go? Okay. Kate has our recommendation. She's going to hand it out. You'll see there's a red sheet which ties right in. It's going to be number 13 in our presentation, and then she also has some handouts. So that we can sort of reference back and sort of back and forth where the numbers are going and coming from, so you can see how they change from the prior to the future. And I imagine there's some spares to hand out. Yeah, perfect. Okay, so, oh yeah, sorry. Yeah, go for it. Okay, so these 3 bullets are the 3 areas in the current RPC agreement that would need to be adjusted. So first is the total required local contribution. Our recommendation is that each municipality's calculated mill rate from section 4C of the ED 279, adjusted downward by the amount of each municipality's minimum special education adjustment, i.e. the adjusted local contribution from ED 279 section F, shall be the total required local contribution. So what that means, in simplicity maybe, is the request of eliminating the equalized mill and having each town be required to raise only what the state says, according to the ED 279, they're required to raise in order to receive any funding from the state. That is what we are recommending the total required local contribution becomes. So Freeport gets the minimum special education adjustment, and then any town would also with the calculated mill rate. So if either of the other 2 towns became minimum receivers, they would also only need to raise the calculated mill rate in order to satisfy the state's requirement for the EPS costs. So that's the first bucket. The second bucket is additional local monies based on the following cost-sharing formula. Each member municipality's contribution to the additional local money shall be calculated as a weighted percentage, with 85% attributed to the municipality's percent of the total member's municipality's state valuation, and with 15% attributed to the municipality's percent of the total of the member municipality's subsidizable pupils. A municipality's percent state valuation and percent subsidizable pupils shall be calculated based on the values reported in the ED 279 sections 4A and 4B. So handout number 7 in the packet is the ED 279 for this year. So if you were so inclined, you could take a peek at those numbers. So essentially what we're saying is that based off of the valuations according to the state and the subsidizable pupils by town that we provide to the state, it would be an 85-15 split, 85% valuation, 15% pupil count. And then the other adjustment we would need to make, we we essentially pick it up in that first bullet, but it is a change we'd have to make to the agreement, is that the total outside contribution to the RSU would be revised to exclude that minimum special education adjustment, because we're allocating that directly to Freeport, so it wouldn't be included in the total additional contribution to the RSU. So the handouts I provided a couple. Number 8, the first in the list, is kind of how we looked at the current, this is our current, on the left side is our current budget, the way you saw it 2 weeks ago when we discussed it. The numbers match up with that. The right column is that same budget number. So remember, this doesn't change our expenditures in any way. It's we're not assuming any change in that top line, how much we have to raise. It's just how it's allocated and raised. So our budget of $34,192,295. We then take out non-shared debt and state-funded debt, right? Because those go directly to the towns associated with them. We have that same 805 in local revenues. You can see back on, well, you can jump to handout 9. Those local revenues are 805 if you want to remind yourself of where those come from. And then state aid, less the state-supported debt service. So the amount that has to be raised locally is $26,838,177. That doesn't change from the left column to the right. It's just how we raise that money locally. So then we have to decide, okay, what's the required local contribution? So this is where we're going to take into account eliminating that equalized mill and giving the minimum special education adjustment right directly to Freeport. So you'll see there's a change in the required local contribution from the left of 17,707 to the right column of 16,652. And I put the source data in the columns to the right. So you can see if you wanted to tie back these numbers, you could tie them back to the ED 279, so you know exactly where the numbers are coming from. And you'll see that the required money that had to flow through the ALM formula last year was $9,130,000, and with this new, with the new recommendation, $10,186,000 would have to flow through the ALM. So because Freeport's required local contribution has dropped by that roughly $1 million, little more than $1 million. Okay, so then the bottom section below the second dark line there, that's what the percentages would be this year based on an 85% valuation, 15% pupil count. Durham's percentage of the ALM would be 19.55, Freeport's would be 69.44, and Pownell's would be 11.01. And those numbers flow through down below and total up the $10,186 for ALM by 3 towns. If you wanted to flip to the back of that handout 8, we did put a couple of other scenarios on here, mostly because these were the top two were the 2 requests from the 2 towns that provided suggestions in their letters. The first is 100% valuation and 0% pupil count, and that's what the impact would be in that scenario. The next one is 0% valuation, 100% pupil count, and that would be the impact from that scenario by town. And then that bottom one, while nobody asked for it, basically that is if we adjusted those numbers at the top. This actually speaks exactly to what Sarah had mentioned at our last meeting, was if we kept our percentages the same as they were, if we only pulled one side of the levers but didn't change the other, that was what the current percentages would look like from the ALM cost sharing formula. So back to the front page, you'll see that with our recommendation of 8515, while we are pushing more money through the ALM, it really has a minimal impact on any of the towns. Durham's goes up marginally, Freeport's and Pownell's both go down. Freeport's is essentially flat. I'm going to call it flat, based on an $18 million. And Pownell goes down about 1% in terms of their how much they would be required to raise from their taxpayers. So I think our goal of not being overly burdensome to the individual towns can be seen in the impact of an 85-15 split, while also giving those items on the other side of the equation that was requested from the towns. So handout 9 and 10 are just other ways that I thought folks might be interested in looking at this. Number 9 is, this is the exact form we used 2 weeks ago. So in an effort of consistency, if people got comfortable looking at that format, this is also how we do our budget documents every year. So number 9 is our adopted budget. So this is exactly what you saw 2 weeks ago. And our right column is the proposed, so with the change in the methodology. So the same budget year, 2 different ways of looking at it. The numbers you'll see match up to handout number 8, but I was just trying to provide it in a format that people could understand based on what we've seen in the past. And then the back side is just town by town. And then handout number 10 is what if we had used this proposed recommended formula for not only the 19-20 budget, but also the 18-19 budget? How does that look? Would we have seen more or less variability than we did? And remember this, I mean, this really is a net-sum game. The money has to be raised between the 3 towns. We're not adjusting the expenditures. So, how would the impact have been by town if we had done this for 2 years? And you'll see on the back side, the percentage change for Durham, Freeport, and Pownell is slightly different year to year. And what we learned from talking to the folks on the original committee that created this, when we asked the question of, was there a reason, and I think Tim said it earlier, you know, is there a reason that the minimum education, special education goes sort of in the pot, if you will, and not directly to Freeport, and what was the point of the equalized mill? I think one of the reasons for that is it really minimizes some of the variability year to year. So some years you'll see a slightly bigger increase, or in other years you'll see a slightly bigger decrease than you would have with our current methodology. So you know, that there's always going to be pros and cons. So this would be a slightly more variable, which I guess is one of our goals, is to keep it variable, but slightly bigger adjustments year to year, which is I think what that handout 10 on that back side really shows. So I think I'm going to hand it back off to Jeremy now that you all look like your head's going to explode.
I think we're just going to basically head back and open it up for questions, but you know, the committee you know, strongly believes that this formula as proposed does meet all the goals that were set by the committee, and definitely will, I guess, have Michelle open it up for discussion.
What I just want to do first before we sort of jump into questions is just lay out our process again, just so folks recall what we're doing next. So what I would suggest is that if folks have questions about the presentation, about any of the numbers, if you've had enough time to process to create questions for the numbers, let's get those out on the floor. Our next meeting in November, we're scheduled to deliberate, and if the board is ready, to vote. So there's no vote on anything this evening. This is purely
presentational, informational. I know it's a lot of information, it's a lot of figures and facts, and we don't expect people to process and absorb it all in the moment. So, but if there's any questions people do have right now that would help them understand it better, please fire away.
There was one handout we didn't mention, which was, there was a handout in there on state valuation. Maura had a question at the last meeting about how that's derived. That bulletin number 1 is from the State Revenue Service website, and it was updated just in September. I think it has a little bit better description than I remember it having. It's still, I mean, a little bit of a mystery because there's market analysis involved with the town valuations. To take the town valuations to what they call the state valuation, they do a market analysis, which I don't think anybody, maybe, I don't want to speak out of, but I don't think anybody in this room knows much about market analysis, but so that's kind of a black box part of it. But there is, I think it explains like more of the process that there, you know, a report goes to the state, it goes back to the town, they have a chance to appeal it or discuss it with the state, and then it becomes final.
I just had a question about that. So just to be clear, the town and the way that the towns determine their municipal valuation, the purpose of the state doing this is to equalize it so there's not differences between the towns and how they do it, to kind of like make it equal across the board and how it's
according
consistent,
to them,
I guess I should say.
Right. According to them, what they feel is a fair market value across the state. And my understanding from that bulletin is that they send those calculations then back to the towns who have to sign off on them. So, yeah. So hold on just one second, just to make Sarah not stand there super long. So I think what the plan will be is just to make sure we have board questions answered, and then if you guys have questions, I think we have another public comment, but can we bump that? We can move that up just to give you guys the opportunity to get your questions answered. We do have one more item on the agenda, but we'll move that past it. Okay. Lindsay, sorry.
I was curious how what the process was for arriving at the 85-15 percentage split. Seems kind of random to just, I mean, couldn't you do any kind of split within 100%, you know, so how did your committee arrive at that choice to recommend?
Sure.
I mean, you guys can chime, well, Jeremy probably would, Michelle can chime in. So we did look at that range that you're talking about, Lindsay, and we really honed in on the goal, the overarching goal to make sure we weren't upsetting the apple cart too much, making it overly burdensome to one town or the other. If you move much further from that particular point, you start really pushing a lot of the burden onto one or the other towns.
And I think we had it in the timeline, but just so that it's clear to everyone, as a finance committee, when we went through this whole process, we looked at, like she said, the range from 0 to 100 and 100 to 0, and agreed unanimously as a committee with this recommendation. Obviously, John exited the board after that vote, but just so everyone knows that all three towns, the finance committee is made up of someone from all three towns, and all three towns were in support of the recommended percentages and other changes. Yeah, Valley.
Thank you for this extremely consuming work that we did for a year. So thank you for doing all that. I have a question about the definition of fair. How did you define fair? And what led you to believe that the prior formula was fair, or the one that we're currently using, and the one that you're proposing? I mean, what I see is an exercise in trying to correct some of the anomalies in how we apply the ED 279. So I'm really encouraged to see that you corrected those and changed them so that it's clear, transparent, and it's what everybody else does in every other district. But I'm curious to know the fairness part. Was it discussed at all? Did you base it on median income or on valuations of median homes, or how do you decide that this is fair?
I think the way we came to fair was similar to I think what Kate or Jeremy had mentioned earlier. When we looked at the other ways of doing it, they all sort of came out very similar to how we were currently. The numbers were coming out pretty close to where we were. You know, we recognize that you know, there's different opinions of fair, right, and what's overly burdensome. Similar to, you know, a compromise when nobody's fully happy, everyone feels like they're paying more than their share. Either somebody's completely off base or it's pretty close to fair. You know, we looked at the majority of how most of them are done, being 100% valuation, and said that, you know, we recognize that we have a town that has some real estate values that are driven by shoreline or those sort of things. So I think that was why we even moved into the idea of not doing a straight valuation request. So we wanted to put another lever in there, if you will, based on usage. You know, I think when we looked at it, we felt that innately, you know, one of the things I looked at when I tried to figure out, you know, percentage of kids versus percentage of valuation, or, you know, how much valuation is there for each kid. One of the calculations I did was just total valuation of the towns divided by how many kids are in those towns. It was kind of surprising, actually. What it said was that for every kid in Durham, there was like 615,000, I don't know, I've got the number here somewhere, $627,000 of valuation to support that kid's education. And in Freeport, for every kid in Freeport, there's 1,339,000. So more than double the valuation per student to support. So the cost to educate the kids on an individual valuation dollar is half, and Pownell was in the middle. They were actually closer to Freeport. They were about $1.1 million of valuation for each kid. So we were trying to look at, you know, is anyone hugely disproportionate from where they are now, trying to not really change the results at the end of the day, because we didn't feel that they were inherently unfair, but to fix those other things. Is that a fair assessment, Kate?
So did you consider at all median income for each household in each town? Because that, to me, represents the apex of what is fair, what can the median household income can afford. And I would like to know if you guys discussed that as one of the central factors to be considered.
It's not really, no, well, we looked at it. We certainly looked at the income. One of the issues we found with income, as you'll see on the pros and cons, is the source. I mean, there's not a consistent year-to-year number to use. And frankly, it doesn't represent the capacity of the towns as a whole to raise funds for education. You know, if they were 3 towns where none of them had really any commercial development, then I think it's probably a bigger point to push. But the 3 towns are very different in that way. So it's sort of an apples and oranges comparison. So, yes.
So it sounds like like what Kate was saying, with not upsetting the apple cart and the 85-15 ending up at that split because it wasn't too drastic of a change for any of the towns. What I'm wondering is, did the committee consider a phase-in approach of saying, okay, ultimately we might want to get to ultimately we might want to get to X. And so we realize that this year or next year, that might be painful for some towns. So for it, one town or another, because it would be drastic swing, it would be that upsetting of the apple cart. So did the committee consider saying, okay, if we did want to get to X, we could phase that in over time and say this year the formula will be this split percentage, the next year it will be a different, till we got to where we wanted to be?
We did talk about phasing in at the very early stages of it, when we weren't sure what we would be looking at in terms of the final results. But I think once we came to consensus on that we didn't feel like anybody's contribution to the district was higher than it should be, we didn't feel the need to phase anything in.
I'd just add that we did, it's certainly something we were aware of because we did look at least that one of the districts had a phase-in in there, and it was incredibly confusing. So we were aware that that was an option, but we certainly, it didn't rise to the point where we were considering it seriously or even had an X in mind. So I don't recall even talking about it. Once we had determined, we felt like where things were at now were pretty good.
And I will say that in our work of looking at other districts and RSUs and how their cost-sharing formulas work, like I said, there was 58% were straight valuation, 30-something% were some form of valuation and pupil count, and then we had this other category which we called other, and they had some crazy formulas in those other districts. And when we went back and tried to sort of follow up on some of those, most of those crazy formulas were districts that are no longer districts. Like everybody is withdrawn but one, or they've completely changed it to a more simplified model, which is frankly what we're doing right now.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. It was usually when you started looking at these ones that were off the wall, you would find out that it was like either like a last-ditch effort before the town withdrew, or they were currently considering withdrawal, or have since withdrawn.
Yes.
I'm sorry if I missed this, but the percentage of pupil count, is that going to be a rolling average or is a straight pupil count? So
the ED 279 already does a 2-year average. That's why you'll see something like 299.5 kids for Durham. So they are already doing an average in the source info that we would pull it from. Same with valuation.
I'm just wondering if there were, is that enough time? Is that a long enough period of time so that if there was some drastic change in the population of a town that it wouldn't have a drastic effect on the outcome?
I mean, longer averages smooth out changes like that, but it's at the cost of the transparency, easily accessible, understood. It's very, very straightforward when you can pull up the ED 279. We take that number, we multiply it by that number, and this is what we're raising. But I hear you, yeah.
I would add to that that the state has also experimented a little bit with the averaging. I think at one point
it was up to 3 years. Yeah.
And they have since gone back to 2. And that's over the last 10 years or so that they've experimented with that range. And it's been at 2 for
a couple years
now.
Doesn't mean they won't change it again next year, but.
Yeah, I guess maybe that could be something we might want to consider if we were to adopt the ED 279 number, that could change. So do we want to think about clearly saying it's going to be a 2-year average?
Right, at a minimum of 2, like if the ED 279 doesn't eliminates averaging, that we would look at a 2-year average, which is still pretty easy to figure out. So. Yes. Can we just get through the board questions first, and then we'll hop to public comments and questions? Yeah.
Process question. When do we get to give our opinion?
I think we'll keep opinions for our next deliberation, just so that everybody has time to think and process and put together their opinion.
Okay. And do we have time allocated at future meetings if you need more than one deliberation session?
Yeah, I mean, we can certainly add more time. I mean, this is obviously a very important thing that will make sure that there's sufficient time for discussion. Yeah.
Okay. And if we wanted the finance committee to, or Michelle, to work up some numbers for alternatives, could we ask that now, or do we wait until next week? Meaning next meeting, 2 weeks from now.
I would say let's discuss it at the next meeting.
Okay. Then we'll need more time.
Yeah. Any other fact, number questions? All right, we'll hop to you, Melanie.
No, this on. I just wanted to make sure I was clear that I agreed with Vali around the definition of fair and burdensome. It's based on the current formula. It sounds like, because your answer to that was it doesn't stray too far from where we currently are. I think the folks that came to the budget meeting last year, if you remember in May, would disagree with that, as well as much of the testimony that has been done by officials for the last 2 years. So I would just ask that at your next meeting, a written definition of how you used fair and how you used, is it a percentage point that you were looking for? Is it, what was it that defined fair and burdensome? Because again, clearly there's some differences around that. And I would also ask that, that Lindsay's question of how did you pick out 85-15? Because again, if one of your goals is transparency, if it's circuitous, it goes back to your fair and not overly burdensome. So you picked that so that it would be match those two things, which were not too far from where it was before. So I'm, as a person that's trying to talk about this in a respectful way to lots of people, I want to be able to, that I represent your thinking clearly. And I think those few points would be very helpful. Thank you.
Thanks. Okay, did anybody else have any questions? Do we need to move the, we don't need like a vote to move the public comment up, do we?
We'll just say we made it as an adjustment to the
Okay, we did it earlier.
Hi, Sarah Tracy, Chair of the Freeport Town Council. I guess in terms of process, and Vali started down this road, but I guess, you know, the towns have spent a considerable amount of time trying to understand both the current formula and also the town's respective positions on our respective recommendations. And I would request, as an official of one of the towns, that you build in a comment period for the towns to comment. And if you deliberate and decide at next meeting, obviously we would come prepared with our comments, but you know, frankly, from our point of view, or from my point of view, it would feel like possibly you wouldn't have adequate opportunity to either fully understand or ask questions about that, or just let it marinate. So I guess I would request that you build in a sort of a hiatus point between now and your decision, so that we have an adequate opportunity to both make comment, maybe even written and oral, or oral, depending on what each town decides. And then there could be some sort of dialogue between the towns and the board, and then at a different meeting you get to your decision. I guess that would be what I would request as part of process.
Okay, thank you. Yes, Maura.
Not a question about the documents, but could this slide be added to the documentation from the meeting tonight? So
Yes.
that members of the public could
Yep, they
see
can
it
pull
in
it up and see the whole thing, yep. Yeah, you have the full thing, right, Michelle? So just have Ginny replace it and upload it onto the site with all of the handouts, 1 through 10. Oh.
Sorry. And then looking forward to the town's analysis, it would be helpful if the board could provide each of the towns your framework document for creating handout number 8, so that the towns can, I understand Vali had asked for different alternative scenarios, but it would be helpful for the towns to be able to crunch those different scenarios in terms of, in formulating our reaction, and it would be kind of burdensome to ask Jessica Malloy to recreate it. I would like to use your template so that we're all working from the same framework and there's no question as to whether we've done something different. So if you wouldn't mind providing the native format of that particular document to each of the towns, that would be very helpful.
Okay. Maddie? Oh, okay. I just saw the out of the corner of my eye. Any other questions? Okay. Thank you. And thank you to Kate and Jeremy, because this has been a ton of work. And Kate did a lot of research. 3 minutes over? That's not bad. Well done. Okay. But we did you count the 10 minutes for public comment? Because we already used that. Oh, no. See, we're 7 minutes under. Okay. All right. So back to our regularly scheduled programming. 14 on the agenda is motion for consideration and approval to employ a Director of Finance and Human Resources for the 2019-2020 school year. Anyone want to move the motion? Thanks, Jen. Second? Vali?
I'm happy to recommend Ann Cromer as our next Director of Finance. Ann comes to us from the Portland Public Schools as the budget manager and as a comptroller most recently. Her references talked about what a hard worker she is, her dedication, and all ranked her in the top 10% of staff that they have known. She has her bachelor's in political science and German. She's obtained a teaching certificate, and she's received a Master of Science in Accounting at USM. We look forward to welcoming Ann on November the 18th.
All right. All those in favor? Okay. None opposed. Thank you. Welcome, Ann, if you happen to be watching from home. And we've already used public comment, so I would take a motion to adjourn. Lindsay? Vali? All those in favor? I'm going to assume everyone's in favor of adjournment. Thank you.